I'm most excited to be talking to Jeyamohan and one of his translators. He has had two books very recently out in English, and I think that's the reason we're here. He's starting to be known to the English language world. I first heard of Jeyamohan very recently as well, through an interview that I read in Scroll, published only last year, I think it was. And one is reading about writers' lives, writers' influences, writers' journeys all the time. But this particular interview really made me sit up because I think it's quite rare to read about a writing philosophy. And I think that's what Jeyamohan has developed. Not just thinking about the craft, we do that all the time. And it's getting sometimes very sort of circular and self-referential, this question about what is feeding our craft and what our influences are and what we think about style and form and so on. So that's one kind of thing that writers are doing a lot of. And the other thing is, of course, talking about the politics of it. And increasingly, the politics becomes the political correctness of what we're doing. And Jeyamohan, in this remarkable long interview, which was my introduction to his work, was not doing either of these two things. And you can go check it out for yourself. But there were two things that especially struck me. One of which is what I'm going to start with, sir, which is what you said about how a writer needs a vantage that is outside literature. And you're obviously completely steeped in the Tamil tradition, both the older one and the one contemporary with you. But what you were saying is that you're very widely read, you've imbibed things from the European tradition, from the Russian tradition, and you said, but at some point, even Tolstoy could be a limitation. I need a source, I need an angle, I need somewhere to stand, which is outside literature. And that's when you started talking about a philosophical sort of guru and went on to talk about your own guru. So I would just love to know, how did you come upon this way of looking at literature and how does it sustain you? And secondly, do you think younger writers also feel the same way? In the generation that comes after you, are there also people who think like that? Have you been able to sort of transmit this idea to younger writers in Tamil Nadu?
Good morning, everybody. I started writing not with that ambition that I have to be a great writer. I have no ambition like that. And I am not considering myself as a literary writer. I consider myself as a spiritual practitioner who is using literature as a tool. I started writing from my life. I lost my parents. They committed suicide while I am 24 years old. And I have a deep philosophical struggle. And I still have a lot of basic questions. I'm writing only to solve that problems. That's why I'm writing. So literature is a tool for me. I am not a literary practitioner. I am a spiritual practitioner. And I worship Tolstoy. Tolstoy is my idol. But you know, Tolstoy translated Schopenhauer to understand him clearly. He took nearly 1 year to translate Schopenhauer. So without Schopenhauer, there's no Tolstoy. To understand Tolstoy, you have to understand Schopenhauer. Schopenhauer is the root of Tolstoy writing. That's why I'm right that every writer must have a root in philosophy and history. I mean a good writer, not a popular writer. Philosophical question sometimes emerges from your life, but you cannot make it clear unless you have a training in proper philosophy. That's why I am always interested in philosophy, and I was always in a quest for a guru. I mean, a spiritual teacher. See, Kumar Nasan, a major Malayalam poet, he has a guru, Narayana Guru. And he learned a lot of things from Narayana Guru. Without Narayana Guru, Kumar Nasan poetry could not be so deep. While comparing with other major poets of Malayalam, for example, Vallathol or Ullur Parmeswarayar, Kumar Nasan has an edge. It is created by Narayana Guru. Similarly, we can say about Subramanya Bharati. Unless otherwise he had a contact with Aurobindo, he could not be so deep or could not be so philosophical and could not be have that kind of vision. So that's why I am always insisting that a major writer's quest will be always in philosophy, not in literature. Literature is just a tool. Literature not an end. It is a way only. That's all.
One of the other things you've spoken about there in that interview and elsewhere is what is a writer's job really once you've written a book, right? And increasingly in our culture, we're at a literary festival. It is to talk about that book, to flog it, to market it, to do your best to, once having written the book, ensure that it reaches its readers. And I think you do a little bit of that. I don't think you're one of those completely reclusive writers who don't believe in engaging with the audience at all. You do some degree of that. But you're also someone who tries to bypass the market in certain ways. And maybe, Suchitra, I'll ask you about that. I'll direct that question to you rather than to Jeyamohan, because it would be easier for you, I think, to talk about his stature in Tamil letters than for him to do it himself. I do know he has a huge following. And some of this is the idea of, it comes from the idea of working outside the market. So he has a website where he gives away a lot of his work for free. He's talked about setting up literary groups, literary platforms for younger writers, all of these things that writers can come together to do or do individually, but which are somehow removed from just the buying and selling of books and just the buying and selling of the writer. So could you just tell us a little bit about what makes Jeyamohan such a popular figure in Tamil Nadu?
Can you hear me? Yeah. There was a major literary critic in Tamil. His name was Kana Subramanian. He wrote a book called Ilakkiyathukku or Iyakkam, a movement for literature. That literature is just not the purveying of words, but a movement in and of itself. It has its own idealism. And Jeyamohan is somebody who comes from that school. And we have a huge literary movement in Tamil Nadu that has come out of sort of a drive and a mission, with sense of belief in the power of literature. So I think that is really what I see as the power behind his body of work, or one of the major powers. You're correct when you say Jeyamohan puts out most of his work on his website, which is, it was one of the things I started reading very early in English. And when I got back to reading in Tamil, I was really surprised that not just Jeyamohan, but S. Ramakrishnan, Charu, a lot of writers have their own websites where they constantly write, where they are in constant communication with their readers. But Jeyamohan goes one step further, where he publishes his major works on his website, where it's free for anybody to read. So it's the most important thing here becomes the cultivation of a reading culture and the cultivation of a new generation of writers. And in those two aspects, I'm also a writer. I write in Tamil, but I'm also a translator, and I feel my literary activities, they come in Jeyamohan's path. I consider him my teacher, and that is what I'm imbibing is the sense of idealism. And through the website and through a literary forum that he has established called the Vishnupuram Literary Circle, he's been constantly in touch with the younger generation and imparting his ideals. And I think that's sort of part of his spiritual mission almost, so to speak.
Thank you. Suchitra, I think when you go to LitFest, and I've done a lot of LitFest in my time, and you start noticing that often the slogan for a LitFest is the power of words, or more power to words. And always when I come across that line, I'm like, which words? And why are we celebrating words per se? Because they can often be completely glib or meaningless. And when I read about Jeyamohan's work and when I read his work, there is like exactly the word you use, the idea of literature as a value, which is not just to do with the fact that it's a free-for-all, anybody can say anything they like, but there has to be a critical judgment at play, and where is that going to come from? And I think it's partly what you said, sir, about having a philosophical vantage, a sense of values from outside literature, a larger sense of where is this coming from? What is this sort of spiritual world in which this literature is anchored? So that's partly it. But I think the other very important thing for you has been individuality, the freedom to break out, to take on the social order, to stand up to the social order, to be your own person. I think that's equally true for you as having a preceptor or a mentor or a guru. And I'm especially thinking of this book, which is one of the two that's in English. It's called Stories of the True. And each of the stories here is about, I would say, a heroic individual. And they're heroes in two different senses, I think. One kind of hero is very ordinary. It's somebody you would not even necessarily pick out as extra ordinary or making any large gestures within the social order, and yet they are remarkable people. It could be somebody who runs a little restaurant where he's feeding people virtually for free. It could be the wife of a businessman who stands up for people who her husband has shortchanged. So there's those kind of heroes, as well as, of course, public figures who are heroic. So that's what I wanted to ask you next. What do you think, why were you attracted to this quality of individualism? And relatedly, so there's stories of individuals, but the little universes you create around them are deeply, deeply rooted, right? So these are worlds in Tamil Nadu and Kerala that are obviously you're familiar with, and that have very, very specific anchors in little temple traditions or the social order, or what is your place in a certain kind of employment opportunities, who gets to do what kind of work. You're very familiar with your context. And yet you're writing these stories about people who are in some way at an angle to it. So tell us about that.
I came to literature at 1986 or 87. At that time, modernism was at its peak. So I found modernism is not fitting for me. It is very, very old-fashioned, writing tacit works with a perfect form and chiseled language, all that. So I moved away from modernism. And I never considered myself as postmodernist, because postmodernist totally different from my attitude. Postmodernism is deconstructive, and it has a paradox in it. So I found myself as beyond modernist, a person who is going beyond modernism. So I started to write works, re-narrating history, re-narrating mythology, and all that. And at the age of 50, I suddenly found that the entire narration of postmodernism and postmodern ideas had made a brutal attack on idealism. Postmodernism dismantled idealism. Postmodernism dismantled ethics. A kind of destruction is ultimately done to ethics. So I lost my faith on idealism at the age of 50. So I want to discover. I want to rediscover my faith on idealism. I want to reconstruct myself as an idealist. So I started to write a story which is called Aram, means ethics. That's the first story in this collection. And I continuously wrote 13 stories at a stretch within 15 days. And I published it in my site. And it was a rage at that time. And this collection, Aram, is the most popular single short story collection in entire Tamil history. It sold nearly 1 lakh copies already in Tamil. And it's a bestseller in English also. And it is shortlisted for a major international award in USA, Alta. Alta, American Literary Translation Award. So, because what I am coming to say is that at that time, that short stories has a need in popular mind also. Like me, almost all my readers lost their idealism in their mind. And they are in quest for recapturing that idealism. That's why these short stories became so popular. So I wrote these 12 short stories as a collection. And practically I regained my faith on idealism. And at that time, I started a movement for literature, which on my novel's name, Vishnupuram Literary Circle. I formed a circle. And we are conducting workshops. We are giving awards every year. We are conducting literary festivals every year. And I started an organization on my guru's name, Nitya Vanam. I bought a place of 20 acres in a hill place and started a organization to teach philosophy and literature. And we are conducting courses every weekend, even today also. So I started a literary movement, and which is very successful for the past 20 years. We are creating a new generation in Tamil. So that's the reason. I can call this wave recapturing the faith on idealism as postmodernism. You can use that term, postmodernism or transmodernism. It's a travel beyond postmodernism to reconstruct our ethics, to reconstruct our ideals in real grounds. That's the base of my writing, and that's the base of these short stories. Thank you.
So the remarkable thing about the book, The Stories of the True, is that, like he said, Jeyamohan said, they're all about idealists. And they are very different little microcosms in which he places these characters who are all at once, like I said, very ordinary, but also very unconventional, if you like. And when you reach the end of the book, you discover that many of these people are actually real people. He's based these stories on people that he either personally knows or has, often people he actually personally knows or has heard of. But this is not, at the same time, this is not a feel-good book. This is not a self-help book. It is just an incredibly realist book of ordinary lives. And I think, to me, that really is an unusual combination. And I want to move now to a very different kind of character, also sort of a self-made man, who's at the center of his novel. This is called The Abyss. I want to hold it up for you so you recognize it in the bookstores. This is wonderfully translated by Suchitra Ramachandran right here. And this, again, is based on certain things that Jeyamohan has experienced himself, but it's very much fiction as well. And it's about a man who runs a begging business. He has got together a group of physically deformed people, some very, very, very handicapped and helpless. And he uses them as a source of income for himself by setting them up in various temple towns, especially during the festival season, getting them to beg for him, and selling and buying these human beings who he calls items. in some ways, it's a very, very brutal novel, but it is also a novel about these so-called items as people. Because as the novel progresses, you realize they may be completely degraded, they are shoved around, to put it mildly, but they also have things you wouldn't expect them to have, including a lot of music, laughter, humor, and philosophy, to come back to something that Jeyamohan keeps coming back to. And yeah, Suchitra, I wanted to ask you about The Abyss first, because I do want to hear from Jeyamohan as well about the writing of it. But just the translation, I mean, I do read a lot in translation. I have read a considerable amount of translation from Tamil literature, and it's rare to come across a novel that has such a wonderful colloquial sense to it. You really feel you're hearing the characters speak in Tamil, but of course they're speaking in English in the translation, but it enables you to imagine a speaking Tamil. I think you've really pulled that off, so congratulations. It's a fantastic piece of work in English. You have a story yourself of how you found the book, how you found the writer, and how you translated it. Would you like to tell us about that?
Sure. So this book is called The Abyss in English. In Tamil, it's called Ezhaam Ulagam. Literally, it means the seventh world. I came to this book pretty late, but there was an earlier work of Jeyamohan's that I had read before. It is called Purappadu. Purappadu means departure. And it's a set of essays, but written in a very fictional tone, where you're not sure where the fact ends and the fiction begins. So it details Jeyamohan's travels when he was a young man, barely out of his teens, when he ran away from home and went all over India. He stayed with a number of strange characters, led a number of strange lives. So this book, what attracted me to this book was its rootedness and the philosophical quest, because by then the literature that I had read in English was either what I considered superficial political analysis, or literature about literature, words about words, whereas what I wanted to read was to understand my own condition, was to understand my own frailties. And this book gave me that, there was that quest in this book. And I would say that in a sense, The Abyss is a successor to that book, although it's entirely a work of fiction. And that's how I came to the book and eventually ended up translating it. I think what is crucial to both those books as well as Stories of the True is that it's rooted in life. So the inquiry there is very genuine. That each of us, no matter where we come from, what language we speak, can relate to, and I think that is the greatest power of literature. And simply the fact that it speaks, it's so grounded and rooted that it leads us into those worlds. So, for example, the world in The Abyss, I feel like the world that we live in is simply, it's the same world, and that world is a microcosm. It's like seeing our world reflected in a little drop of water. It's the same world. So I think when I was translating the book, there was one point where I realized that, no, I'm not writing about these strange people, I'm writing about myself. And I think that realization is what marks a great work of literature out for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Suchitra. Yeah, I think a simple word for that would be humanism. The fact that you can take a story about people so down and out, so degraded, so outside the system and at the mercy really of the system, and still write a novel from their point of view. To me, that's, I don't know if I would call it postmodernism, but I certainly call it humanism. There is a deep humanism in your work, and it's certainly there in this novel. But I am still curious about inner life and psychology. How do you get close to, especially your main character in this novel? And I was remembering as I read your novel, this quote by A.K. Ramanujan, where he's talking about the difference between the Indian imagination, writing about fiction, writing in fiction, and the Western. And he says that in the Indian, we don't have a very strong psychological tradition. We're not that interested in the like Jean-Jacques Rousseau confessional, deep self-analysis, the autobiographical, the inner life. In our writing, we are less interested in that and more in liberation and ecstasy, those experiences, rather than that kind of endless self-analysis and sort of a liberation through that. He was saying in the Indian tradition, the liberation is outside, not in us. We're looking somewhere else, and we're looking for states of ecstasy outside, through other means. And I kept recognizing that in the novel. And like I said, especially in this main character, because he's good and evil at the same time. He's using these people to make a living very, very callously. He seems to feel nothing for them. He buys and sells them like bags of, sacks of grain. And at the same time, he's a very, very charming family man who is affectionate to his daughters, who cares for the larger social world he is in and how he's seen. He doesn't want to be seen as a bad person. And I wondered, again, if there's a difference here between the Western, I'm generalizing, I know, but is there, between sort of good and evil as absolute opposites? So I'm just imagining, in a Western mind, would this be a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde kind of novel, whereas here it's not at all? He's completely recognizable as somebody who wakes up in the morning and is domestic and then goes out and kicks down his beggars and treats them, like I said, as completely instrumental to his own means. What would you say about that?
Well, I have to say one thing, that I was a beggar at Varanasi, at Rishikesh, Haridwar, and Palni, and many places. I was a beggar. I was a sannyasi, mendicant. I am writing from that experiences. Still I am writing those words, the persons I came to meet at that time. So I am not writing with what you call empathy. I have no sympathy or empathy to those people, because I feel one among them. So I am writing as a person belongs to their community. That's the difference. So I usually object the word humanism. The word humanism coined by Western philosophists. There's a philosophical base for that word. That means the humanism means that you can call it androcentrism. That means anthropocentrism. That means giving importance to man, imagining a world that is man-centric. Humanism emerges from that idea, and I don't believe that idea. The humans are not so important in this universe. So we are the part of the life cycle here. So the word humanism, giving importance to human beings, giving empathy and sympathy to human beings, is totally rubbish in my idea. So I don't accept it. This novel is not talking about humanist viewpoint. It is not about humanism. It narrates a seventh abyss. I mean, Padalam. It narrates a world which is parallel to our imagination in Puranas. Padala. Padala means the seventh world. It is abyss. You can compare it with the purgatory of Tande. In this purgatory, every person is in the process of purifying himself and moving towards a salvation. In this novel, you can find that every person in this novel has a character arc. He is traveling towards his liberation, though he is in a hell, though he is in a high pressure mood, but he has a liberation. At least one person is liberated in this novel. He is Kuyan, that one character. So Kuyan is a character. He has his liberation through these toils. So it's a travel through purgatory towards Paradisa. I will define the novel like that. So it is not about the pain, the oppression of the beggars. It is narrating a world which you can have salvation in any condition. If there is a darkness, there is a light, you can travel towards it. That's the core of the novel. And again, in Western philosophy, I mean in Western thought, there is a major idea of sin in it. Through sin, there is psychoanalysis is coming from it. So for more than 2,000 years, they are developing the idea of sin through Christianity. And various schools of Christianity are discussing about sin again and again. Sin. And we have an idea of sin in India also, but it is not that omnipotent. In Christian ideology, every human being is born out of sin. They are dying in sin. They are living in sin. So sin is something which is very parallel to God in Christian. So they are analyzing sin for more than 2,000 years, and they created the idea of psychoanalysis in West. So the basic of psychoanalysis is the concept of sin. So in this novel, you can never find a single word called sin. We are not talking about sin.
But what about evil? Is that connected?
Evil is there. Evil is there, but not sin. So that's the difference. Evil is a part of the cosmic order, which is well balanced by other forces also. It can be manipulated, it can be dealt with. Every human being can have an element of sin in him. Every man has an element of sin in him. He can deal it with. So it's not omnipotent. It's not a God. So that's the difference between a Western point of view on life and the point of my novel, Abyss. So Abyss is not about sin. Everybody is sinner. And everybody is in the process of liberation also. So in this novel, you can imagine that the beggars are being sold. They are corpses sold by other people. But everybody here are selling ourselves. Our body is for sale here. If you are working in a multinational corporation, you are actually what you are doing. You are selling yourself. You are selling your hands. You are selling your mind. You are selling your eyes. So that's the level of characters in that. And you are selling others also. If you are working in an institution, you are selling other people. You are bargaining other people. So that's what doing everybody is doing in this novel also. So the major character Pandaram, he is selling beggars. He is treating them very cruelly. At the same time, he is a very good father and very good husband also. Same is, yes, see, a CEO in a big company. He is selling people. He is treating them very badly. At that time, he may be a very good person. He may be a very good father. Maybe a very good husband. The dual situation is in everybody's life. That's what the novel says about people.
Suchitra, I want to ask you what you feel about this. But I want to underline that when Jeyamohan is talking, he talks very philosophically, but the writing is so realist. Yeah. It's like this highly developed, gritty realism. And for me, I think that's why it works, because I find the ideas very interesting. But if I didn't get to know this Pothivelu Pandaram as a real, odious, affectionate man, the ideas wouldn't work at all. Yeah. So to me, that's Dostoevsky, right? He's playing out these ideas of salvation, sin, redemption, but we wouldn't care two hoots for those ideas if his characters were not so alive. And I think, to me, that's the real achievement of your work, that you really know the people you're talking about. But Suchitra has to...
Majority of characters are well known to me, particularly this particular Pothivelu Pandaram. He belongs to Nagargoil and I know him. And one person Mr. A.K. Perumal is a historian and folklorist in our area. He introduced him to me. So I know him personally very well. So I can identify with him. That's the major problem. That's a major thing. I know him and I can identify him with me. He is me. That's why, and I never allow my character to speak philosophy. A creative work should not directly speak philosophy. It should be artistic. It should be life. I have to convince you that this is life. Then only it works.
I think it's life first and foremost, always in your work, and I'm envious of it because I think you're coming from such a rooted milieu that allows you, and when I say rooted milieu, I don't mean only one, because you've clearly moved around in different spaces and different experiences, but they're all of them very, very convincing. But Suchitra, you have a wonderful translator's note at the beginning where you're not just talking about your relationship to the book and his work, but how you felt about what now Jeyamohan has dismissed as humanism and said humanism and human beings are not that important. What do you feel? Because it's a very difficult book to read in some ways. I imagine it can't have been easy to translate. And you keep feeling the liberation should be a social one. They should be freed and have a better life. It's like a very ordinary human response. Why are these characters in such misery? Shouldn't they have better lives? And then you realize that the novel is never going to be able to liberate them in that way. They're never going to have that kind of betterment, right? And so I think there's an acceptance in the novel. It's not a resignation because they're alive till the end, but they're accepting of a social order in which they will never be better off than they are. But what do you feel?
I think one of the reasons I started reading literature is that I'm a deeply idealistic person, but for various reasons I'm very suspicious of ideologies, of any ideology. I've been reading a writer, an early Malayalam writer. Her name is Lalitambika Antarjanam. She wrote in the early 1900s, right? And she was a social activist. She was a feminist. She was a Gandhian. So she wrote fiction and she took part in these movements. But then when you trace the line of her writing, you find that later in her life, she realized that the ideologies that she had backed weren't actually able to answer her questions, or it didn't have space for women like her. And this is a constant refrain that you see when you follow the lives and thinking of individuals who are deeply idealistic and who have personal quests, who have a problem to be solved. And it's a sense that I had been struggling with in my own youth, in my own development. So when I come to a novel like The Abyss, we were earlier talking about how it's grounded, how the novel is rooted in life, how it doesn't spout philosophy. No fiction should be doing that. It should make me feel that, right? There's a saying that a writer shouldn't be crying, but he should make the reader cry, right? So that's the sense. So what I got out of the novel was I think I would still call it humanistic at some level because it foregrounds the greatness of sort of our human sensibility of the human being to transcend these hardships that we all have to face, the suffering that we all have to face as part of the human condition, that we all have it in us. But it's not going to come about because of a revolution. It's not going to come about because a leader is going to turn up and save you, but it's going to come about in the most mundane of places. It's going to come about in the middle of hell. The purgatory paradise exists in the middle of hell. You can find it there. So I think that's what I find. Like there's a character called Ramapan in the novel who's an aesthete. He could be an artist if he wanted to be. There's a character who is an intellectual, right? There's another character who's she's an embodiment of a chaste woman. So these are the values which we consider as high values, values that you aspire to in the course of life. But you can find it no matter what your condition is. And I think the test for such ideas is always one's own life. So I don't see literature as words that exist on a page. I try to take those ideas and see if they apply to me, if I'm able to grapple with them as I mediate through my own life. And that's the touchstone that's always worked for me, whether it's Dostoevsky or whether it's Jeyamohan.
Thank you. That's lovely. I think I have time for one more question, then we may have to open it out to you, to all of you. And that's to do with a word I used early in the conversation, which is ecstasy, and how A.K. Ramanujan said, in the Indian tradition, what we're trying to get to is liberation and ecstasy. And I thought of that word again, reading about your process, because both these books you've written in an inspired state that has lasted for a remarkably short time. It makes me nervous to think that you wrote The Abyss in a matter of 5 days, is that right? And the stories were written in 12 days, or, I don't know the exact, it's mentioned in the introduction, but yeah, you've been in a state, I would consider that a state of ecstasy. To have written these deeply busy, complicated books in such a short time seems just like divine inspiration. How did you do that? And or maybe you can't answer how you did it, but you can tell us something about what you felt afterwards.
But actually, we cannot classify the process as Eastern, because Dostoevsky used to write like that. He describes his writing as being possessed. The word possessed he always used for narrating his love writing process. But at the same time, Thomas Mann used to plan his work for years and years, and he used to write very meticulously and very carefully. So I consider Thomas Mann as a genius also. So this is a personal thing.
It's not a single model.
It's not. Tolstoy used to write his novels very carefully. He used to correct many times. Even after publishing, he used to correct his text. But Dostoevsky wrote in a frenzy, in a madness. So my writing process is I have to prepare my subconscious for writing. It will take some days, but when I start a book, I have to finish it. If I cannot finish it, I can never finish it. So I have a lot of novels and short stories unfinished even in my table. So I cannot finish it. I wrote a novel more than 1,500 pages and yet to finish, and I don't know whether I can finish or not. Sometimes, if I started to write a novel and I can finish it on a single sitting. I completed a novel which Suchitra has translated it, and it had to be published by Jagannath maybe next year. On his Kumari Thuravi. I wrote the novel in a single sitting. I wrote it within 36 hours continuously. So that's my way of writing. I used to describe my way of writing as dreaming through words. Dream cannot be interpreted. Dream is
can't be interpreted or interrupted.
Dream cannot be interpreted. Well, interrupted dream is not a dream. It happens. You cannot create it. So I love dreams. So I am dreaming through my words. That's my literature.
Wonderful. That's wonderful note on which to end. But we will end with questions if there are any. Is there a mic going around if there are any questions? Yeah, there's one hand up.
So when you're writing from your own experiences or your life, how much is the struggle to remove I from the book? I as in you yourself.
That's an interesting question. But that's the major problem for any creative writer, removing he from his writing. That's why we keep a distance from the experience. An experience should be away from us for a time. Maybe time time can create the distance. Sometimes the form of literature can create the distance. See, this is my experience. But I imagine that main character as a female, or I will imagine the major character as an old man. That will create the distance. So how to create the distance between the experience and the author is a major challenge for any author. So time is a major point. You can, after a particular time, you are getting away from the original experience. The experience became a fossil, and you can handle that emotions. So, see, my father and mother committed suicide in 1986. It was a major blow for me in my life. And I never wrote anything about it till now. So the distance never happened in my life. So I'm expecting it. I may write it at my age of 90 or something. So I'm waiting for it. So the distance, we can create it through forms also, through literary forms. Actually, all kind of literary forms are designed only to create the distance between experience and the author. Thank you.
Thank you for that very interesting conversation. I was thinking of what you said about Schopenhauer and his influence on Tolstoy. And one thinks of him, Schopenhauer is of course a great skeptic and a person who sort of interrogated idealism very sharply in foregrounding this conception of the world as will. And of course, Tolstoy takes it in a different direction. But this dialectic between, as it were, skepticism and idealism, is that something which sort of you have also reflected upon? Because in itself, idealism can also find itself faced with certain kinds of, shall we say, impediments, or it may come up against walls. There may be a swing almost away to its dialectical opposite. So if you could tell us a little about the dialectic between skepticism and idealism in your work. Thank you.
Thank you for the nice question, sir. The first thing I have to say is, we cannot define Schopenhauer as in a single word that he's a skeptic. He had moral and ethical questions in the first phase. And in the final phase, he became skeptic. But now, while we are reading Schopenhauer, the moral and philosophical questions of his early times is more important than the skeptical answers of his later period. Both Tolstoy and Thomas Mann, and almost all great writers of that time are influenced by Schopenhauer's first phase. They are influenced by the major questions of ethics and morals of that time. So, philosophers not giving answers to writers. I am not asking any kind of answers or explanations from any philosophers. I want to clear my questions. That's why I am approaching a philosopher. Tolstoy and Thomas Mann, both, so all three people got their major questions from Schopenhauer, not answers. So they never moved towards skepticism. In fact, in the later period, Tolstoy became little skeptic, but the other two are more idealistic and more powerful in their ideologies, idealisms also. So the influence of Schopenhauer in these writers is he formulated their basic questions. That only we can say that.
Thank you so much. I think we're going to have to end with Schopenhauer having the last word because we've run out of time. Thank you so much. This was really inspiring for me. Thank you, Suchitra. Hope you enjoyed it.